When you think of monks, you probably picture serene figures lost in meditation, but the Sōhei were nothing like that. I've been reading a lot recently, and the deeper I went, the more cracks started to show. Beneath their holy robes, the Sōhei hid not just blades, but a history soaked in violence, corruption, and vengeance. See, there's a truth about the Sōhei that's been buried for centuries. And once I saw it, I couldn't look away. At the end of this video, neither will you. They were soldiers of faith. Devotion was their mask. Power was their god. This video is based on my own research and dives into some of the lesser-known, darker sides of the Sōhei. It's not presented as absolute truth, but to offer a different perspective on their history. Take it with a grain of salt, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. In the year 949, a group of monks from Todaiji Temple did something that would change the course of Japanese history. These weren't just any monks, they were the guardians of one of the most important Buddhist sites in Japan. Todaiji, with its massive bronze Buddha statue, was a symbol of imperial power and religious devotion. But on that fateful day, the monks weren't meditating or chanting sutras. They were arming themselves. To understand why holy men would take up weapons, we need to step back and look at the world they lived in. Medieval Japan was a place of constant change and conflict. The emperor's power was waning, and local warlords were rising. In this turbulent time, Buddhist monasteries were more than just places of worship. They were centers of learning, art, and wealth. Temples owned vast tracts of land, controlled trade routes, and wielded significant political influence. But with great power comes great danger. As temples grew richer and more influential, they became targets. Rival religious sects, ambitious warlords, and even the imperial court itself coveted the temple's wealth and land. The monks found themselves in a precarious position. Their teachings preached peace and non-violence, but the world around them was anything but peaceful. At first, the temples tried to protect themselves through diplomatic means. They forged alliances, made donations to powerful families, and appealed to the emperor for protection. But words and gold weren't always enough to keep the wolves at bay. Some temples began hiring samurai and mercenaries as guards. This solution, however, came with its own set of problems. See, these hired swords were expensive, and their loyalties could be bought by the highest bidder. Faced with this dilemma, some monks made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. They began to train themselves in the art of war. It started small, learning basic self-defense techniques, how to use a staff for protection. But as the threats grew, so did their martial skills. Monks began practicing with real weapons, studying strategy, and hardening their bodies through rigorous training. This transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without controversy. Many monks believed that taking up arms went against everything Buddhism stood for. There were heated debates within monastery walls. Some argued that violence, even in self-defense, would taint their spirits and lead them away from enlightenment. Others countered that protecting the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, was a higher calling that justified learning to fight. As the years passed, a new type of monk emerged. They were still devoted to their faith, still spent hours in meditation and study, but now they also spent time on the practice field, honing their skills with the naginata. The blade of the naginata was its defining feature, an elegantly curved, single-edged weapon designed for powerful sweeping strikes. Typically ranging from 30 to 60 centimeters in length, it was forged in the same manner as samurai swords, using high-carbon steel for a razor-sharp edge. Unlike a katana, which relied on direct cuts, the naginata blade was designed for wide, arcing slashes, maximizing reach and control. It was securely mounted onto a long wooden shaft, reinforced with an habaki, a metal collar, and often fitted with a sharpened tip at the opposite end for thrusting attacks. And so, armed with the naginata, the first warrior monks slowly emerged. This brings us back to that day in 949 at Todaiji. The temple had been locked in a dispute with the government over control of their temple. Negotiations had failed, and the monks felt they had no choice but to take drastic action. Led by a charismatic monk I could not find the name off, they armed themselves and marched on a powerful official's residence in Kyoto. However, this wasn't just a protest. It was, in fact, an armed demonstration of power. The sight of holy men brandishing weapons shocked the court and the common people alike, and perhaps shattered the image of the peaceful, meditative monk forever. The government, faced with this unprecedented show of force, had to back down. Monks had used the threat of violence to achieve their goals, and it had worked. Other temples took note. In the years that followed, more monasteries began training warrior monks, and so what had started as a desperate measure for self-defense was slowly evolving into something more aggressive. Enryaku-ji, perched atop Mount Hiei, overlooking Kyoto, became particularly infamous for its warrior monks. The temple's strategic location gave it immense political and military significance. From their mountain stronghold, the Sohei of Enryaku-ji could march on the capital at any time, a fact that the imperial court and rival clans knew well. As their strength grew, so did their ambition. See, the Sōhei had begun to involve themselves in land disputes, not just to protect their own holdings, but to expand them. They intimidated local officials, threatened rival sects, and even engaged in open warfare with other temples. The Sōhei's tactics were a far cry from the peaceful teachings of Buddhism. They used their spiritual authority as a shield, claiming divine right even as they wielded weapons of war. Temples became fortresses with high walls and armed guards. The sight of monks in armor carrying naginata and bows became a common and fearsome sight across Japan. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of the Sōhei's rise was how it transformed the relationship between religion and violence in Japanese society. The idea that monks could also be warriors challenged long-held beliefs about the nature of spirituality. Some saw the Sōhei as protectors of the faith, willing to fight for their beliefs in a world that often required violence to survive. Others viewed them as a corruption of Buddhist ideals. In 1081, the true extent of the Sōhei's power became apparent when tensions between two major temples, Enryaku-ji and Midera, reached a breaking point. These temples had long been rivals, competing for influence and resources, but the conflict that year escalated dramatically. The Sōhei of Enryaku-ji, emboldened by years of unchecked power, launched a violent assault on Midera. They descended from Mount Hiei in a coordinated attack, overwhelming the temple with speed and brutality. Buildings were destroyed, treasures looted, and monks, once committed to peace, were killed in the violence. Reports began to surface of Sōhei engaging in activities that were decidedly un-Buddhist. Local people spoke of extortion, of protection fees, demanded by warrior monks who seemed more interested in lining their own pockets than safeguarding the teachings of the Buddha. As the Sōhei's reputation for violence grew, a disturbing disconnect emerged between these warrior monks and the more traditional members of their order, regular monks, dedicated to lives of study and meditation, found themselves increasingly at odds with the Sōhei who claimed to protect them. The serene atmosphere of temple life was shattered by the constant presence of armed men. their minds focused on warfare rather than enlightenment. As tensions between temples escalated and the demand for warrior monks grew, a disturbing practice emerged. Temples, desperate to strengthen their forces, began recruiting mercenaries and local thugs. These men, with no monastic training or spiritual calling, were given the robes and weapons of Sōhei. They shaved their heads and adopted the outward appearance of monks, but beneath the surface, they remained hired warriors. This revelation changes everything we thought we knew about the Sōhei. The image of devout monks reluctantly taking up arms to defend their faith crumbles in the face of this harsh reality. Many of the warrior monks who shaped Japanese history were not monks at all, but mercenaries playing a role, exploiting the respect and fear accorded to the Sōhei for their personal gain. The year was 1180, and Japan was about to erupt into chaos. The Genpei War had begun, pitting the Minamoto clan against the Taira in a struggle for control of the imperial throne. As samurai armies clashed across the land, an unexpected force entered the fray: the Sōhei. The decision to actively participate in the conflict was not taken lightly, but as the war engulfed the country, neutrality was no longer an option. Major temples like Enryaku-ji and Kofuku-ji found themselves drawn into the political maelstrom, their vast resources and skilled warriors too valuable to ignore. But the Sōhei were not a unified force. Different temples aligned with opposing sides in the war, often based on long-standing alliances or grudges. Enryaku-ji, the powerful monastery on Mount Hiei, threw its support behind the Minamoto clan. Their rivals at Kofuku-ji in Nara sided with the Taira. This division among the warrior monks added another layer of complexity to an already chaotic conflict. The Sōhei's impact on the war was immediate and devastating. In 1181, Sōhei forces from Enryaku-ji joined the Minamoto in an attack on Nara. The city, home to some of Japan's most sacred Buddhist sites, was put to the torch. Kofuku-ji and Todai-ji, great temples with centuries of history, were reduced to ashes. The sight of warrior monks burning rival temples shocked many, but this was still only the beginning. As the war raged on, the Sōhei found themselves involved in key battles across Japan. At the Battle of Uji Bridge in 1180, Sōhei from the Miidera Temple fought alongside Minamoto forces to hold off the advancing Taira army. The Sōhei's participation in the war reached its climax at the Battle of Dan-no-Ura in 1185. This naval engagement would decide the fate of Japan, and the warrior monks were there to play their part. Sōhei from various temples manned ships on both sides of the conflict. When the sea ran red with blood and the Taira clan met its final defeat, the Sōhei stood among the victors and the vanquished. Their actions had helped shape the outcome of the war, but at a terrible cost. The new Kamakura shogunate, established by the victorious Minamoto clan, viewed the warrior monks with suspicion. Their power had to be checked, lest they become a threat to the new regime. At first, the relationship between the warrior monks and the samurai was one of cautious respect. Both groups valued martial prowess and discipline, and in many ways, they were cut from the same cloth. Some samurai even sent their sons to be educated in temple schools, recognizing the value of the knowledge preserved within monastery walls. However, in 1571, Nobunaga set his sights on Mount Hiei. Oda Nobunaga, who sought to unify Japan under his rule, had set his sights on Enryaku-ji. The monastery's strategic location overlooking Kyoto, combined with its vast wealth and military might, made it both a prize and a threat. Nobunaga knew that as long as Enryaku-ji stood, his control over the region would never be complete. For months, Nobunaga had planned meticulously for this moment. He gathered an army of over 30,000 men surrounding the mountain, cutting off all escape routes. Then, They began to burn. The fires raged for days, consuming ancient temples, priceless artifacts, and countless lives. As the fight wore on, it became clear that this was no ordinary battle. Nobunaga had given orders for total destruction. His men didn't just defeat the Sōhei, they slaughtered them. Monks who surrendered were cut down without mercy. Those who fled were hunted through the forests. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to erase Enryaku-ji and the power of the Sōhei from the face of Japan. It was a clear message from Nobunaga. No power, not even that of the revered Sōhei, would stand in his way. The warrior monks, once a formidable force in the nation's religious and political landscape, had been brought to their knees. Throughout history, we've seen religious orders take up arms, ostensibly to defend their beliefs. The Sōhei were not unique in this regard. From the Knights Templar in medieval Europe to the militant monks of Shaolin in China, the world has witnessed the rise of warrior priests time and time again. The early Sōhei truly believed they were fulfilling a divine mandate, using their martial skills only when necessary to protect their temples and communities. But as their power grew, so did the temptation to use it for worldly gain. When religious institutions align themselves with political powers or military forces, they risk losing their moral authority. Struggle between faith and power is an eternal one. It's a battle fought, and definitely not just on distant battlefields, but within the hearts and minds of believers everywhere. Thank you for joining me on this one. If you want to see more content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.